I'm chairing a parallel session this afternoon entitled Physical Activity, the Panacea. So obviously it's about physical activity and cancer and how it can improve the well-being of patients, and there's some data coming through that it actually improves outcome. So we have speakers from around the world describing well-conducted clinical trials, such as Stacey Kenfield from California, who show very clearly and eloquently that if you can motivate patients to exercise up to 3 to 4 hours a week, there will be considerable benefits for them and for the health service in general. Well, part of the talk this afternoon in the NCRI conference is to look at the biological pathways which change after physical activity. So you're right, there are indirect and direct effects of physical activity. So the indirect effects would be, of course, you lose weight and therefore your estrogen drops and chemicals such as leptin, etc. drop, and they're good for the cancer physiology. You could argue that you go out in the sun and your vitamin D levels go up. You just mentioned mood. Yes, we know that exercise improves your mood, and there are lots of data that if you're well, not lots of data, there are data to show that, for example, if you're depressed after prostate cancer, you have an inferior survival. So that's the indirect effects. But there are lots of direct effects. So we know, for example, if you exercise, your insulin-like growth factor levels drop and your insulin-like growth factor binding protein increases. And now well, IGF, if you add it to cells in a petri dish, encourages them to grow and proliferate and not commit to apoptosis, etc. So that's, and there are lots of data to show that with the drop in IGF levels, it correlates with improved survival. So we know that's a real chemical phenomenon which happens. But there's other chemicals. We know that prostaglandin levels drop. The leptin, which is produced in fat cells, reduces. And again, these all have pro-cancer properties. Leptin levels, although they're made in cancer cells, it's not just that you get slimmer. Exercise directly reduces leptin levels. There was a neurotransmitter called irisin, which when you exercise, this is secreted by muscles. And we know that this chemical slows cancer growth. It stops cancers metastasizing and invading other organs. So it's sort of almost too good to be true. And a few years ago, there was a bit of a controversy that maybe the analysis of irisin in the bloodstream was inappropriate. But more recently, it's been confirmed with mass spectrometry that is a genuine chemical called irisin, and it does go up when you exercise. And I could go on and on and on. There are probably about 180 things which happen in our body which improve the environment for us and decrease the environment for the cancer cells. Well, my part of the session is to look at the general overview of the data, but there are two preferred papers as well, and the conclusions from one of them, which was quite disappointing, is that only 11% of our patients currently exercise to any degree of effectiveness to sort of kick in the anti-cancer properties. And when we compared that to a study from 3 or 4 years ago, it was about the same level. So one of the conclusions are that we're getting lots of evidence coming through it's beneficial, but we're failing to encourage people to exercise. And this is a universally available strategy which is under-resourced. And it's great that the NCRI has got this session because it's highlighting the importance, but it's also highlighting the need to do more for our patients. Well, that's true. You may have a patient who's never exercised, so it's an alien advice for him. But as you said, then they've got fatigue, hot flushes, joint pains, and then on top of that, you're advising exercise. They look at you and think you're maybe an uncaring doctor by even suggesting it. So that's perhaps why some doctors don't suggest it to the patients. But one of the papers we're presenting this afternoon is looking at how we can speak to patients. How, for example, most of the literature tells people that exercise is healthy. Well, one of the papers showed quite clearly that patients already know it's healthy. It's a bit like smokers. They already know smoking's unhealthy, but it doesn't change their habits. So one of the things we found out is that the patients are afraid to exercise because they think their fatigue is going to get worse, their joint pains are going to get worse. So it's almost it's an educational point for a healthcare professional to say you need to change the way you speak to people. So that's one thing. Also, there is some data looking at behavioural change interviewing. So instead of sort of preaching to patients that they must do this and that, it's more of a encouragement, and it almost comes out as their idea. It's a good idea. So there is that. But also addressing their toxicities in clearer. For example, we know that 55% of patients with cancer have arthritis, or we induce arthritis through aromatase inhibitors or biological agents. And a lot of the mainstream treatments are not that effective, non-steroidals and so forth, which they don't like taking because of indigestion, etc. And what we're doing in our research group is looking at sort of self-help strategies which help symptoms, which then would allow them to exercise. So we're taking it a step back. For example, we know that polyphenol-rich foods, such as broccoli, turmeric, pomegranate, green tea, which we had in a previous supplement, which I was on this program 2 years ago. We also know from data published by Arthritis Research that those polyphenols protect joints. And you can either put those in a supplement or maybe encourage patients to eat more of those foods. Either way, that is very rarely discussed with patients. So we're actually exploring nutritional avenues to protect the joints, which will then allow them to exercise. So it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. And it's considering it's such an important issue, and for example, arthritis is so common and exercise is so under-resourced, it's almost surprising that more research is not done in this field. And you could argue the reasons for that, but at least we're now beginning to start studies in this field, and other people like Stacey Kenfield from California and the other speakers this afternoon.